Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Spirit Side Podcast. I'm Paul James Caden, and today on the show, we're going to be talking about an issue that I've been running across quite often in the work that I do and seeing it on social media, and it's the problem of politics fracturing families and friends, people that have known each other for a long, long time, suddenly disowning one another because one is a Republican, one is a Democrat. I mean, in some of these instances, one may be an extremist and, you have to distance yourself from those kinds of people. But a lot of these cases are just because. And it's something that I don't want to do a lot of shows that are political, though I've been mentioning it a lot in the last couple of weeks, because I think this is really something we need to start raising some awareness about to as many people as we can, that we're really letting this get too far under our skin, and the separations are becoming alarming for the reasons people don't even talk to one another anymore. But joining me to talk about this today is my co-host from People Under the Stairs, Stan Wanglund. It's been a while. Welcome to the show, man.
Hey, thanks, Paul. It's good to be on a show where we get into the spirit side of things. And this is one that, definitely has a secular aspect to it, meaning that it, a non-spiritual aspect to it, a real social, psychological phenomenon that's going on. But it also definitely has a spirit side to it, in my opinion. It's definitely one of these things that, these kinds of divisions that we see even amongst people in organized religions, who are very spiritual people, where they deny, the legitimacy of other belief systems with people. And we don't have to do a lot of searching for history to see how that goes down. People get burned at the stake, they get shot, they get put in concentration camps, they get, discriminated against, they get, where you can't marry them, you can't relate to them. So this stuff where people disown you because of your political party, it's kind of like six of one, half a dozen of another.
It is. It's really going off the rails, and we're going to talk about some of the reasons why this might be, and also, getting into the spiritual aspect of all of this. But before we do that, we picked up a few new listeners, and some folks out there might not be familiar with who you are. So give them a little bit of a background on who you are and what your area of expertise is.
Well, I was the former Secretary of State under Jimmy Carter. Under his, oh, Jesus, no, that's not true. I wanted to bring a little humor to the spirit side here today, folks. I always like teasing Paul with those things. No, in all seriousness, my name is Stan Wanglund, and I'm a 69-year-old male. I'm going on 70 years old, this year, and I'm a clinical psychologist. And I've been in the field of psychology, actually, even while I was in graduate school in 1972 to the present, where I still teach for the State University of New York at Broome. I teach psychology. I've taught all kinds of courses there in psychology. And that's my part-time career. My regular career has been as a psychologist and administrator for New York State, for the Office of Mental Hygiene, the Division for Youth many, many years ago, for a few years, and for 37 years for the Office of People with Developmental Disabilities, formerly called the Office of Mental Retardation and Developmental Disabilities. So my entire adult life and then some has really been spent as a public servant and care provider and teacher and trainer, and those kind of things. Program developer, and I also have been a person who's in all kinds of management consulting, and had my own businesses, had my own private practice, and and most late, of late, my super interest when I retired full time, I really wanted to make documentary films, and just by happenstance, fell into an area that is just as good, if not better, and that's podcasting, where you can reach incredible amounts of people, meet all kinds of folks, very easily transition from one idea to another. And, I have my own podcast called Just Thinking, which is a pretty successful show, and another successful podcast with Paul called The People Under the Stairs. So we talk about all these kinds of issues, and my first podcast was called Mind, Body, and Spirit. So, this site with Paul is how I think we really got to know each other and decided to do our other show together, because we both had shows that had to do with mind, body, and spirit. And, in my career, all these kinds of issues on Paul's show and my show and shows like that are things that, I've dealt with either on a personal level, myself, or, dealt on a professional level with other folks. So does that answer your question, Paul, or did it go way beyond where you wanted me to go?
I think you put the audience to sleep. No, that's good.
Did I knock them out there? Wake up now, darn it.
No, this is why I wanted to have you on the show, because I certainly do want to delve into a little bit of the psychological aspects of all this division that's going on, but also, like I said, a little bit of the spiritual side of this. But, as I was telling the folks in the beginning of the show, I do spiritual advising, spiritual counseling. That's my job. That's what I do. And I've been talking to a lot of people over the last about 2.5 weeks on the phone, and I was telling my wife, 9 out of 10 of these people, 8 out of 10, when I talk to them, they're saying how lonely they are, that they don't have anybody to, talk to in their lives or to share their everyday problems with. And the reason being, it comes out, it's because of political differences. I was talking to a lady just the other day who, she is a Republican. Her 2 daughters are Democrats, and just because, I flat out asked her. I mean, it was the first time I ever talked to this lady, and she seemed nice and level-headed, down to earth, like she was someone you could really just talk to. And I said, well, this division, with you and your family and your daughters, is anyone, kind of being a political extremist, with their views? And she said no. She said, we have conversations like anybody else around the dinner table that, one might believe in this policy, the other one, disagrees. And, this is what caused the split. They just disowned her because. And, it's becoming a real problem. And I got the idea for this show on the fly because I was looking on Facebook this morning and I saw someone, I don't know her personally, but I'm friends with her on Facebook because of the whole, spiritual, connection type of thing. And, she had put up a post about a woman who divorced her husband after 22 years of marriage because she found out that he voted for Donald Trump. Now, again, it didn't say anything in the article that he was an extremist or that he was, pushing his views or going to Trump rallies and acting out. She just put forth that, she found out through a friend that he confided in and told that, he had voted for Donald Trump. And that was all she wrote. And, there were all these women, under her post saying, good for her. I wouldn't vote a Trump supporter either. Another woman was saying, she found out that her boyfriend that she was in a relationship with voted for Donald Trump, and she ended the relationship just because. And, I stepped in, and I said, folks, you really have to think about what you're saying here because, look at the division. Do you think this is okay that someone would leave their husband or their wife or their family, after 22 years or a lifetime just because you found out that they went into the voting booth and voted for Trump or whoever, whatever the politician may be. And the woman that wrote the post, automatically, when you voice an opinion or state a fact, she's like, oh, you need to calm the F down. You have triggers and all this stuff. And I said,
a lot of psychobabble out there already.
Yeah, and I said, no, it's
stuff, yeah.
I said if it's a trigger, I said I think it would be a trigger for a good thing because I'm seeing a lot of this, and it's a real issue. We look at the ancients and we say, oh, look at those fools who went to war over religions and killed one another and went to war. I said, but now here we are in the modern age doing the same thing over politics.
Because if I can interject something, would that be okay if I interjected something at this point, or were you not finished yet?
Yeah, I just wanted to cap it off that I tried to make the point, but of course it was like water off the duck's back. Like she just wasn't grasping it, and it was just so peculiar for me that on that spiritual side, looking at her Facebook wall, there's all pictures of angels and Jesus and Bible verses, but yet you're giving thumbs up and saying good for you for somebody that broke their marriage vows over something that I think is so superficial. But go ahead and interject what you were going to say about that.
You see, our country and the world in general, in my opinion, and folks, I am not trying to say this as some kind of elitist, because I threw out some thing intimating that I was a fairly educated person. I come from a lower blue collar family in Brooklyn, New York. My father worked for the Metropolitan Transit Authority. We lived in a little one-bedroom apartment. I guess you'd consider by today's standard that we were poor. So I don't come from some, a privileged background or anything else like that. But here's my point. We have never, ever, been in my 70 years almost, and believe me, I grew up in the 50s and 60s and certainly saw a world in many ways that was rather uneducated. Many people had decent jobs who had an 8th grade education and could, make good money and support their families. No kidding. But here's my point. We don't study history. We don't, we don't see further than the iPhone in front of our face or the tablet. We have everything monopolized. Here's where I will agree with President Trump. We're being bombarded with technology. He's a master at it. With very little knowledge about any of the subjects, but he's very powerful in terms of, advertising erroneous ideas to manipulate people, and so are all the other parties that you have out there and all the other situations. But here's my point. All that being said, okay, this isn't anything new. Right before the Civil War in our country, and if I took a poll to prove my point and said, tell me the years of the Civil War, probably 60% of the folks listening to the show, or 60% of the population say, oh, yeah, in the Civil War, you mean like in 1915? They don't even have an idea what that was about. But with the Civil War between the Confederacy and everything else like that, a big issue was slavery. Brother fought against brother. Father fought against son. Relatives, never spoke to one another again. They met each other on the battlefield. This happened during the Revolutionary War when people were patriots and Tories, or after the Revolutionary War. That's the war that gave us our freedom from England. Mm-hmm. Those kind of things. I'm just reminding people because a lot of people also don't know what the Revolutionary War was, believe it or not. After the war, the Tories, the people who supported England, people burned their houses down. They had to go back to England. in World War II, in Germany, in Italy, and things like that. People, who found Hitler, they found him appealing and attractive. People who found Mussolini. You know what I'm trying to say here, Paul.
Mm-hmm.
There were very divisive times. Something happened, and people became very divisive over it. And oddly enough, the same thing happened to happen in America in the 2016 elections in our country. Has there been divisiveness in this country beforehand? Absolutely. Go back and go on television and watch the old All in the Family shows. And you know what that is, Paul. Don't you? It's All in the Family with Carl Reiner and Archie Bunker and all those things.
Mm-hmm.
You've seen one of those shows, haven't you?
Oh, yeah.
I was there as a kid. People were stunned watching the show on television about this bigot, Archie Bunker. It was supposed to be a put-down of people who were bigots. And can you guess what I'm going to say, Paul? Did Archie Bunker turn into a bigot, or did he turn into a national hero?
He was definitely a bit of a hero.
He wasn't a bit of a hero. It was one article after another. As a matter of fact, Norman Lear, the creator of the show, got so worried, and said, so some of the cast members, they said, Jesus, this has turned 180 degrees around. We wanted to show what Archie Bunker did is he tapped into all the bias, all the prejudice, all the ignorance, all the kinds of things that just happens to be part of the human race. And that was around at the time due to what? The Vietnam War. And I don't mean to give your listeners here some, long lecture on history. I'm just saying these were big political events where there were police riots in Chicago at the Democratic National Convention. The cops were beating the piss out of protesters. Construction workers in New York City jumped off the scaffolds and beat the hell out of protesters to the war. There was Nixon on one side and the silent majority, and there were the McGovern Democrats and people marching and burning the draft courts on the other. And if you don't believe me, go back and look at all the stuff from Woodstock. Everybody, if you had long hair, you were a goddamn hippie. And God forbid a policeman got a hold of you, he'd beat the crap out of you for long hair and say, go get that damn haircut. Now, here's my point. Does that sound familiar to the time that we live in today? It sure does. And if you take what was going on then, when I was growing up, as a teenager and a young man in the 60s and 70s, if we would have had an internet, my God, there would have been World War III in the country. You couldn't see that stuff on the news 24 hours a day. You saw what you saw when you got the 5 o'clock news or 6 o'clock news with Walter Cronkite. You didn't have Fox News being a newscasting agency for the Trump administration, and you didn't have MSNBC being, a spokesperson and a thought twister for the left. So you, the consumer, all you're getting is information that says, danger, Will Robinson, danger, Will Robinson. And that ties into reality therapy and psychology. I wanted to come full circle for you. The crazy thought that there's one right answer to things. And if you challenge that answer in your mind, it's a catastrophe. So if you lean towards Trump, and you think, holy shit, crazy Bernie, he's a communist. I actually heard a guy say that commie socialist. You can't be a communist and a socialist. They're both totally two different things. I'm not support where, Trump does something. That bastard, every once in a while, even a broken clock gives you the correct time twice a day, doesn't it? Trump can't always be wrong on everything. So you've got people thinking that the end of the fucking world, pardon my language, on a spiritual show is going to happen if you don't agree with their action or you support a person. And, sometimes that's true, like in World War II Germany. Sometimes it was that important. And if somebody, approved of a guy like Hitler, you had to say, hey, man, you might have been my brother, but come on, out of here. Maybe it has to do with slavery or white supremacy or being a Black Panther in the 60s. Where you want to kill white people? There were movements like that.
There were.
You know, it just happens to people, and they think that their life, that society, that everything hinges on you having to believe what they believe. And you can go all the way back through history. You know, if you watch those pictures where you see the Inquisition, you know, the torturers in the Middle Ages, and they were burning witches and everything else like that.
Mm-hmm.
I went to St. John's University, and they had a wonderful library that had all these books and stuff from hundreds and hundreds of years ago about the Inquisition. You know, people never realize, because they don't know anything. The Inquisition was actually gentler than the secular laws. When they used torture, they used, well, the regular police at those times, so the barons and counts, they could do all that same stuff. But with the Inquisition, there had to be a religious reason for it. There had to be a doctor present. There had to be opportunities to recant. That was supposed to be the good stuff.
Hmm.
Can you believe that? But what do we know? We don't know any of that stuff. And I'm not supporting the Inquisition. But what I'm saying, at the time, it was benevolent. Compared to what was there. But here's the point with fanaticism. When those guys convicted you and they were putting the flames on you, we always picture these guys as being crazy sexual perverts, and they were, you know, monsters. And how about if you believed that if you were a heretic that you were going to spend everlasting life in hell? Forever in hell. Isn't that what the Bible, that, you know, the catechism of the church said at the time, the policies? So if a guy set fire to you and you're going to pass away in 5 minutes, was he doing you a favor compared to eternity?
Well, there you go.
I'm serious. And this is what they would think. Many times. Putting the flames on you, having you on the rack, making you confess, going, hey, it sure sucks now, but it's better than eternity and a day. So what the hell, how does that all come back to people divorcing their husband or wife? It's the same thing. People have never changed. People just think that if you're for Trump or you're for crazy Bernie or you're for Joe Biden, what about his, you know, if you any of these crazy things that people put in our head to manipulate us, to get us agitated, to make us think that this is the end of the world, we put such value on it that we can't even be around other people. That their very presence threatens our existence.
That's the truth.
And that's one of the spins of why people hate other people. That's how in World War II you ever watch the films of Jewish people being loaded up? I'm German and Swedish. And I always tell people, in my lifetime, I knew people who were Nazis. I went to school with people. Their parents were Nazis.
Mm.
If your father or mother lived during World War II or the Depression like mine did, what do you think that people who lived overseas and were in Germany, what do you think? There were a handful of Germans who did those things? There were millions of them. And they were doctors and lawyers and school teachers and whatever, and they do any kind of terrible thing that you could possibly imagine. Because they were convinced that Jewish people, gypsies, other people, all these inferior kinds of people were destroying their life. It was a catastrophe. And isn't that the same thing when you see the news every day? And you're saying, and people say, Donald Trump, he's destroying the country, he's taking it off the guardrails, he's doing this, he's doing that. Isn't that what you hear?
Mm-hmm.
Those Democrats, look what they're doing. It's a witch hunt. The guy's out there breaking the law right in front of your face. He says, it's a witch hunt. And here, let me do it again. So he's got the people on the other hand, they've got them fired up. It's a distinct period in history. It's always there with people, but it's so much more intensified now. And then if you think you have a wonderful show about the spirit side, I had Mind, Body, and Spirit. How popular are those shows compared to all the other trashy shows that are out there?
Yeah, not very.
Even though you have some big people, and then the people that you see that are the big wheels in there, guys flying around in big planes lines, chasing women, doing everything wrong, that you could possibly think of. They're not your bread and butter priests and ministers and rabbis and pastors and spiritual people, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't get do you get any shows or any information on those people? All you get is a steady diet that if you're a spiritual person, that you're a stupid idiot, that you believe in genies, that this is an archaic way to think about things, that you're a radical, you're anti-scientific. Was I just spouting to you pure science and history? Yes. Am I a religious person? 100%. They're not incompatible. But if I tell that to 85% of a highly educated audience, 80% is going to just patronize me and say, hey, sure, you're entitled to that. And probably 75% is going to think that my IQ is lower than theirs. Which it isn't, by the way, folks.
I always find that ironic because, right now the concept of God or spirituality, it's laughable. It's the tooth fairy in the sky. It's the Santa Claus in the sky. But it's ridiculed. Oh, it's weak people that need religion or God as a crutch. But then you turn around and you see those people making almost a religion out of politics.
Absolutely.
And these are the people that are going on personal crusades about whether it's Trump or Sanders or the Democrats or the Republicans. It doesn't matter how you slice it. That I've said a million and one times on this show. People can't help but look for a leader, someone to tell them which direction to go in. So if you don't have God or religion, you're going to put that in something else, whether it's politics, whether it's TV personalities or rap artists. I mean, I know people who are not necessarily religious, and their whole entire existence is the acceptance, of going out and finding a relationship, someone who will tell them, they're the smartest, they're the best, they're the most wonderful, and if they don't get that, they're livid or they're absolutely depressed. So, I mean, choose your poison. At least in spirituality, we have some kind of, certainly we have to trim away the man-made additives in all of the things, whether it's Christianity, Islam, even Buddhism, all the things that may have been, added to some of the books. But once you get to the base of it all, you have a good moral code, and even talking about how societies should behave. And we were talking about this earlier, how some of that stuff is just timeless. But you're not going to get that from, billionaire politicians or somebody with an agenda that just wants to, take the country or the world one step closer to how they think it should be. And they don't care how divided we are. I think if anything is the tooth fairy, if anything is wishful thinking, it's blindly putting your trust in another fallible human being who sees the world through power and dollar signs.
Mm-hmm. Well, people are definitely looking for saviors. You can see that as you watch the politics of the primaries and things that go on now. It's I don't even watch I watch the news on a minimal level to keep well informed on what's going on there. But after that, boom, once I've heard the one story, boom, I don't want to hear it for 19 more hours in a spin cycle from any side in there, because it changes from minute to minute, and people can't let the reality just evolve. They're constantly trying to manipulate the news and make the news into or these situations in what they want them to be. And when you spoke about the moral codes and values that people have, every human being, whether they realize it or not, you, me, the listening audience out there, the non-listening audience, everybody has, for lack of a better term, this little thing we call a superego. It's the stuff that kind of balances your activity, your values, your beliefs, how you perceive reality, how you were trained to think about things, from your mother, your father, your school teachers, the policeman in your neighborhood, the grocery store owner. If you've got a lot of bad instruction, well, you have a very distorted perception of the world. And people forget that, the wonderful thing about the spirit side of things, and it is a mind, body, and spirit, you don't have to treat the teachings of different religions or different spiritual teachings. You don't have to treat them as your religion if you don't want to. But that doesn't take away from their goodness. That doesn't take away from their helpfulness. That doesn't take away from their value in the 21st century. One of the best books that I've ever gotten, every day I'll read something scientific, I'll read something philosophic, and then I'll read something that's theological, something that has to do with religion. And I have a little book that I got, of all places, at Ollie's. They have all this wonderful selection of books that they have extra ones in print, all kinds of bestsellers there. And it's called the Red Book. No, it's not about Bernie Sanders and communism. It's about the 49 teachings of Jesus, the 49 commands that he had. And it's very funny because my wife is an atheist of all things, and I'm a very religious person, and we get along fine. And I'll always say to her, just read these, not in a religious way, but read them as a moral code, as advice. And you go through them, and you say, these things were written 2,000 years ago, during the Roman Empire, during when people were crucified, when the world was a brutal and autocratic. These are brilliant thoughts then, and they still are now. What's in there that a good therapist, a good judge, a good teacher, a wise family member wouldn't tell you?
Mm-hmm.
And you can find that in other books from other religions and other thoughts. But we rule that out. We immediately rule that out, and you're taking away a big part of the moral fiber of human beings. And when I say moral fiber, it's not that old argument waving the flag and say, you got to have better moral. Human beings need good, solid, healthy reasons for seeing things the way they are, and then for making decisions to act in certain ways. You just don't fly by the seat of your pants. When you fly by the seat of your pants, you become like a wild animal. You're not a civilized person. And if you've been a civilized person and you're not taught those things anymore, then you become less civilized, in my opinion.
Well, we do. It's people think that they're civilized or educated, and I've ran across people who are, very smart, good education, but when it comes to common sense or even morality, they don't. It's completely lost. I tell the story of the person I talked to several years ago. And I don't remember what form of like some kind of like tech or scientific work, that he did. And his whole thing was, human beings are just products of the universe. There's really no right or wrong. It's just what have been instilled in us by society and our parents. And so if I go out and I kill someone, I'm really not doing anything wrong. It's just the idea that I did something wrong. So, that's and things like that, loom very large in the minds of a lot of people. This is how they think. morality. That it's a big thing, even in a lot of spiritual circles. They'll say, "Well, there's really no right or wrong." God's going to forgive us for everything. We're not going to answer for anything in the end. There is no judgment, and or we may have to sit and think about what we've done, ourselves. But there's no consequence. There's no right or wrong. There's no black and white. It's all gray.
And that's the political correctness that fits into. It's very similar to political correctness. And what Paul is describing, ladies and gentlemen, the people listening to the show, those are classic things that people do. They're called defense mechanisms. They're called rationalization, intellectualization. Rationalizing would be things like saying there is no right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Intellectualizing would maybe be like I'm giving you these lectures on history and everything else like that. It might be beating around the bush and throwing every kind of a sidebar in there possible, intellectualizing about it. You could be projecting onto other people. It's not my fault. Well, what about Biden? What about the what about argument? That's the projection. So these are all the things that get us off the dime from confronting reality. And, I would say this idea that there is no right or wrong, that's a bad idea, and that's something that periodically pops up in human history. That isn't new, and it's happened at many other times, and it's usually at times when people are bound and determined they want to do things that are very different than the prevailing culture has judged to be different. You can see that nowadays. I'll say that to people, and I'm not being anti-gay or, against transgender people or some other special thing or same-sex marriages or abortion or any of these controversial issues. Hey, man, people have to understand that when these things come about in a culture that has said, hey, it's not normal, it's not legal, it's not desirable for two people of the same sex to marry, for the past 200 years. And then all of a sudden, people decide for whatever reasons, legitimately, whatever, that we're going to change that you're not going to feel uncomfortable about that.
Mm-hmm.
That there's no right and wrong. Yeah, to a lot of people, there is very clearly a right and wrong in that. And I'm not being I'm not against gay people, and I'm not against gay people getting married or any such thing like that. Not because I want to be politically correct. I'm just not against it. I don't think it harms anybody. That's been my observation. And in certain cultures, it's harmful. In certain cultures, it can be deadly. Live in Brazil, which has the most, liberal gay policies as well. They also have this incredibly high murder rate. For people who are gay or anything else like that. So, it's like when you think of the abortion questions, things like, there's no right or wrong, it's my body. Well, yes, that is. And the law says you can have an abortion and everything else like that. Is it a simple question? No. No, it isn't. I was a director for 20-some-odd years of the high-risk birth clinic in New York State, which is a clinic that's dedicated to, to dealing with kids who were born prematurely, who have, all kinds of disabilities. We worked very intensely with the neonatal intensive care unit at the hospital and everything else, kids being born who were just literally, a pound. And everything else like that. And you see them fighting for life, and you see their parents loving them and everything else like that. And I taught childhood and development for years, and you look at the images of fetuses and things like that. When there's a population of people who have a problem with abortion, I support the laws for abortion and everything else like that. It's a very tough thing. I don't know if I have a right answer, for that. But I can also understand the right to life people. It's a horrific thing, to think about late-term abortions, or if you're trained to think that life is very sacred in the universe and in your religion. Am I getting off the beaten track, Paul, or are these all the kinds of issues that get people where they want to kill one another?
Well, they're definitely Um, I think definitely issues that people want to kill each other over, but
in this town, where you live now, and I live, just a very few years ago, they shot a whole bunch of people down and killed. It was on the national news right here in Binghamton over the abortion clinics.
Mm-hmm.
Little old Binghamton killed a whole bunch of people.
And Stan was right there on the front line.
No, I was not. But you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Well, our sands in the hourglass are kind of running out for this episode, but kind of coming full circle. How do you think that the country, society gets itself back on track spiritually, where we're stopping all this division, we're stopping the abandonment of our family members and our friends and our kids and our wives and our husbands? How do you think we put on the brakes and make this cease and desist? Is it possible? Or are some people just too far gone looking for that leader that it doesn't matter what you tell them or what you say to them, they're just going to follow anyway and think you're absolutely nuts?
I think if it's going to fix itself, it'll fix itself after some kind of a national tragedy. The United States tried to stay out of World War II, and they did anything. We had the smallest army. You could literally write in a notebook how many machine guns there were in the army or tanks. People aren't even aware of this in the 30s. And then we were attacked by Japan, and it all changed in a hurry. People were woke, as we say right now. And this divisiveness that you've described, it's got the country torn apart, like Reconstruction after the Civil War or something like that. I'm being really serious. This is just like the Reconstruction period, where you have the Republicans and Democrats are pretty much like the North and the South, the Confederacy.
Yeah, that's
vehemently opposed. It's identical, or the Vietnam War, doves and hawks.
That's kind of my take on it too. I think people are just going to run with this until something really really tragic or bad happens. And then suddenly they'll all want to pull together to try to rebuild or save themselves. But, when is it too late? I mean, I think my next show after this, I was thinking, we have our eye on all this, political, rigmarole that's going on. But we're not looking at bigger pictures. I myself, I'm not a fanatical religious person, but I've always been interested in, the subject of prophecy, particularly that of Christianity and even, Islam, because they're very, very similar. And, I've studied these things since 1991, really, in depth. And you look at the state of the world, where the people just seem like they're so completely blind and divided and fighting, and, politics is the be all and the end all, and, God is the tooth fairy in the sky. And man, we got locust swarms, we have earthquakes, we have volcanic eruptions, we have these what people call the mystery booms have really been sounding off all over the world now. There were some in the UK, different states here in the United States, and people don't know what they are, And there was one clip on the news where I want to say it was Pennsylvania, but I could be wrong about that. And they said a bunch of people woke up, in the middle of the night. There was a noise outside. It sounded like machinery grinding or a giant whale, like an underwater creature, like moaning, and they played a little bit of a clip of it. It was very eerie. You got all these signals going off in space, radio signals all of a sudden.
Yeah, there's shows on this too. Sure.
Yeah, there's so much going on, people can say I'm crazy, but I believe that there will be that final day, whatever that is.
No, as a matter of fact, you and I are on the same page. You just did this thing here, and I think you might not be seeing the forest for the trees on one thing, but it's, again, 6 of one or half a dozen of another. If you are a scientist, and I know you like things scientific, and I am a scientist as well as a spiritual person, it's the climate change.
Oh, well, absolutely.
That's the one that's gonna take people out and get them really moving in one direction for a while. I used to teach salespeople with psychology, and the thing is, what you say is you always want to create a sense of urgency in people. If you want to sell a weight loss product, you want to show how you're not going to, the women aren't going to love you, or the men aren't going to love you. You're not going to get a good job, or you want to frighten the hell out of everybody, and then people start moving in that direction. After 9/11, I'll never forget my youngest daughter driving by the house, and she had those American flags that people were attaching to the car, and I said, "Get that friggin' thing out of here. I don't even want to see that." She said, "Why?" I said, "No, I'm all for America. That's terrible." I was madder than hell. I said, "But, hey, man, let me tell you what people are going to do. 6 months or a year after that goddamn flag is on there and we're at war with somebody," I said, "when it drags on just a little while," I said, "people are going to start getting pissed off, and they're not going to want any part of it." Well, what happened in our country? We've got a 20-year war going on. So 20 years later, because we don't have a draft, if there would have been a draft, it would have been a 2-year war at tops, because people would have been rioting in the streets again. But the point being, other than all the Lee Greenwoods and songs about America and all that other kind of stuff at the NFL football games or whatever, people don't give a shit as long as somebody else goes over there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it'll happen for 20 years. Look what is happening to the climate. Look at the historic floods. Charleston is on the news today, Charleston, South Carolina. It's not even going to be the same city anymore. Florence in Italy, the coasts, the east and west coast, it's a fact. Huge amounts of the Arctic and other places. Antarctica was 65 degrees all month. The coldest place on the face of the earth. So what's going to happen? It's not biblical. That's if it is, what's the difference? It's all scientific.
Well, I mean, that's the thing of it is, I mean, we can look at at least for me, I look at climate change and global warming, and yes, it's scientific, but I think a lot of people, when you talk about prophetic happenings.
Oh, sure, I get that. They're going to find the prophecies that talk about that in the Middle East too, and all those things. Sure, I get you. Maybe they're correct.
There's a lot of people that think when it comes to fulfillment of prophecy, it's going to be some kind of comic book type happenings that are so outside of the laws of reality and science. But you look at this whole universe, as many great spiritual scientists say that, God was, is the greatest mathematician. Everything is so, precisely made and calculated, so when you're looking at global warming, I mean, you absolutely have a lot of prophecies about, many fish in the sea dying off, the waters raging, that by the time it reaches its peak, that for half the day the sun will be so hot it will scorch the earth, so you can definitely find, and that's just a couple, many things that talk about the sun being hotter, the things happening in the heavens and the problems, the results of all that it's going to have on the planet, So I add to that. I mean, because none of us really know, when that particular day or hour or what it's all going to consist of. But if this is a part of it, what might be added to it later on once it reaches the fever pitch, It's talking about greater plagues and greater famines, strange things happening in the heavens, which we're certainly starting to see some bizarre things, with the outer space suddenly coming alive. So again, you don't know, and I'm not the kind of person that likes to get out there and, it's the end, you better be ready, because I think that's, a lot of baloney when people do that. But I also think with anything else, you have to be a little spiritually aware and realize where we might be on that timeline, and get your priorities straight, if for nothing else, to realize none of us are going to be in this world forever, whether it's through cataclysm, end time prophecy, dying of old age, cancer, heart attack. As the Muslims say, we're all going to return to God and take what we did with us. So
nobody gets out of life alive. I've always said that, and it's and there's another homily that applies to your original point. Was, when do you think we'll our societies will get together? And both you and I mentioned cataclysmic events. I mentioned the climate change and global warming. You're alluding to pretty much the same thing. Could be things from outer space or whatever in the universe, but the situation we have right here, right now, is already beyond the danger point. Here's the point. There's no that sense of urgency that I was talking about before to motivate people. It will be there when New York goes underwater, which it will. New York is already looking on mitigation programs to build like a seawall around it, because of the absolute knowledge of the ocean is rising right now, and will be problematic like it has been in the past few years. But here's the point. People, when it becomes really dire, will have a common purpose, and that is survival. And, when it comes to spirituality, one thing with most people, not everybody, but the saying still works. There's no atheist in a foxhole.
Yeah.
My daughter had my youngest daughter had a recent medical scare with something that was quite serious, and had some scanning done on her brain, and they had found some stuff, and then needed to determine whether this was something very, very serious or just something serious and not fatal. And anyway, it turned out to be something serious, but not fatal. And one of the things that she said after the tears flowed down her eyes, I heard her say, "Thank you, God." And to me, I always make it a practice ever since I've been a very young man, and you know this, Paul, because you do the same thing. I thank God every day for all the good things when I'm feeling great and everything else like that. I'm always mindful of that, not because I'm better than anybody, but I just know that that's the way to go in life for me. When things are bad, it's not anything different for me in terms of my conversations with my divine maker. It's just a different event that's happening in my life.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a different or a new practice for me, like it is, like it isn't for a lot of people, or it is for other people. But I wasn't going to say anything, but I did say something to her. I said, isn't that amazing? I said, it's very funny when we speak to God. Is that a slip of the tongue, or is that one of these moral things that we were talking about before? Now, maybe you don't have to be a Christian, you don't have to be a Jew, you don't have to be a Muslim, but at the very least, this is a show on spirituality. Maybe it's important in terms of this whole concept on divisiveness and cruelty and cutting people loose and all the things we do to one another. Maybe it's a good thing to think about, to be mindful of our roles in the universe. Think of what would happen if one of these spaceships that we send out to other planets came back with even a microbe. It would be the biggest discovery of all, that here's some other form of life in the universe. But here on Earth, we treat each other like garbage.
Mm-hmm.
When life is so scarce. And it's one of those things that people are not trained anymore to think about. I know your wife's son is, a doctor of philosophy. And I know that I'm sure that he would agree with me. And you don't have to have a PhD to think about those things. You know, when you're devaluing somebody who works at the McDonald's, or you're saying this guy or gal is a clown, in the scope of the universe, most of the universe, or all of it, as we know so far, is empty, devoid of anything, of any life. It's beautiful and however it is. But here we are on a planet that we're blessed to have all these different species, all these different living things, these different people and experiences in our life, but we treat them like they're garbage.
Yep.
Now, for me, that's why the spirit side is an important show. This is an important conversation. Because maybe somebody will go out and say, you know, that husband of mine, that kid of mine, that wife of mine, am I really dumping them because I'm just not getting along with them? You know, on a variety of other issues, because I just want to go out and do other things, because I don't want to be married anymore. I hate them, I've always hated them. Or am I that petty? Do I not understand that this is another thinking, breathing human being who maybe just sees things different than I do?
Right. And I just wanted to clarify for a moment on your story, the particular daughter you were talking about that said thank you God, she is she is atheist as well, correct?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. So and it's true, you know, people, like you said, no atheist in a foxhole. When it all comes down to the nitty gritty, you know, people are coming together, they're praying together, they're finding unity. Why can't we do that when things are good, to keep them good? You know, why do we have to wait for some kind of tragedy or, you know, cosmic slap before we turn around and say, gee, let's love one another, let's come together in unity and let's work together. It really is a very backwards, you know. And again, you know, the Bible, the Quran, I mean, all those books talk about it, you know, that especially in the Quran, you know, that talks about when most men, you know, most people, when things are going well, they don't acknowledge at all, you know, they're very selfish or violent or, you know, hateful, or they dishonest toward their fellow man. But then if it's all taken away, you know, God sees fit that it's all taken away overnight and that person loses everything, suddenly they will cry out to God, you know, and that's, boy, that's true. Definitely a truth. And I think that's something we need to change in the way we behave, you know, in this world.
Well, we should do a show on who's teaching us that. Who's teaching us that? No one. You're left to your own devices. If you're an intrinsic learner, you're an intrinsic learner, Paul. I'm an intrinsic learner. I'm sure many of your folks listening to this show are intrinsic learners. That means that you want to educate yourself. It doesn't matter whether there's a school teacher or somebody out there and doing that for you. But you have to introduce these ideas to people, not where you give them the right answer, where you explain to them the process. You know, that's where religion, and we should do a show on this sometime, organized religion is broken down. They keep giving us the answers versus giving us reinforcement on the process. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't need the pastor of a church necessarily in my life. I think it's very important to hear his or her message and to go through that ritual. That's a beautiful thing. But I don't need them to explain every facet of my religion. There's a simple thing that I've been trained when I went to, confirmation class, and when I went to church as a kid, or when I grew up, and then I trained myself. I can go to the library or go on the internet, and there's 1,000 commentaries on religion. I can sit and read the Bible. I can read the Quran. I can read the Book of Mormon, the Tao. I can read comparative religions. I can read and study for myself. But somebody has to encourage that in me. Somebody has to tell me that's a good thing. That right behavior, right thinking, right values. Like the Four Noble Truths. Mm-hmm. That those things are important. Your culture does that. But do we have a culture that supports that? No. We were just talking about that before. Everything's right. Everything's okay. You're nervous? You got a trigger? No, this guy can't come on the campus. We can't talk to him. If you're a religious right person, no, there's no way you can. No, you can't have an abortion. You can't have the. Well, there are many situations where it might be, or it is, very legitimate to do that.
Mm.
But you can't discuss it.
Nope.
I mean, I don't think it's being gone over in school. And then with the stuff that goes over in school just changes from one politically, correct bunch of psychobabble many times to another.
Man, that's a show in itself, the education system.
It is. Yes, it is. That's the way the world's always been, by the way, and that's how we're manipulated. In my opinion, we're being manipulated away from the spiritual side, and we're being manipulated away from an understanding that there is mind, body, and spirit. Modern medicine certainly doesn't not practice mind, body, and spirit in really top flight places. They have spiritual components to your healing and your therapy and to your well-being. And then other places clearly try to eliminate that.
Mm-hmm.
And how wise is that? And what is that based on? Why wouldn't they both? Why wouldn't science and spiritual thinking and all these things? Why do they have to be incompatible? They're not incompatible for me.
Oh, they're
not exceptional.
They're absolutely not incompatible. But with all that being said, our last grain of sand, I've pushed this podcast to the time limit hilt for the listening audience. And
I probably overtalked it today a little bit.
But I think, this was a show that, keeping it within 30 minutes, the topic was too big, and I think all the things that we covered and where we ended up, I think it was great, and that's why I just let it roll, because these are all things. I think this is a show people should listen to 2 or 3 times, share it, a lot of good food for thought here. And before we close out, anything you would like to promote about yourself or tell our audience today?
Yeah, very quickly. Thank you for letting me share my particular points of view. I hope they were delivered in a respectful, loving manner to people in a non-divisive manner. And there are times when you, me, everybody else has to say and do the right thing as we think something is right. And even if it's a little bit hurtful or unpleasant to me to hear it or for you to hear it, it's not meant to harm anybody. It's meant to, the comments are made, for you to think and come up with your own extra piece of insight into it.
Mm-hmm.
And this makes me definitely want to start another show on the spiritual side, because that's one of my true loves. That's one of my true loves, the spiritual side. And I just hate in the 21st, I don't even mean to use that word, hate. I really dislike in the 21st century this idea that spiritual matters have to be viewed as being ignorant or irrelevant or something. It couldn't be anything more of a false statement. And I would encourage people listening to the show to understand that. I'm trained in so many classic techniques of scientific things in psychology, and the very first thing I will approach is always a spiritual component first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too.
Yeah, absolutely. Not that the other ones aren't good, but usually it's a very similar answer, and a much more comforting one. And I do have a show, Just Thinking, which goes over a lot of things. If you care to take a listen to that, and so it's certainly not a show on spirituality, although we get into some things with that sometimes. But and if you want to reach me, Stan Wanglund, it's SWANGLUND @gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. And I don't know, Paul, maybe we can get a big forum going on a show here to have several speakers see what other people think about this particular topic. You're a delightful guy.
Well, thank you, and you are as well. This was a great conversation.
Yeah, I loved it.
And
I would have enjoyed a nice cold beer with this.
Well, I would be a bottle of water or a glass of milk, but
well, you're more spiritual than I am. I'm just a devil worshiper.
I haven't drank in many, many years. One sip and I'd probably be, a real piece of work. I get very silly when I used to drink.
I hear you.
But anyway, folks, I hope
they call it spirit.
I hear you. I hope you'll give Stan's show a listen to. He's got a lot of good stuff. Check out our other podcast, People Under the Stairs.
Yeah.
You can find it on Apple, iTunes, and all the popular podcasting platforms. I'll try to remember to leave a link underneath the in the description, because we talk about a lot of things on that show that are similar to this, and also kind of in the paranormal sometimes. A little bit of the spiritual context. So we hope you'll give it.
We should do some more spiritual shows together, though. Topics like this, which are really general things, but at least for me, I like being able to throw in the spiritual references there a lot.
We should.
I don't do any other shows.
We always do really good shows, and we should try to make it a point, to whether it's on People Under the Stairs or this one where we do one at least once a week.
Oh, yeah. Always. Well, thanks for having me on your show, and thank you, listeners.
Yes.
And hopefully Paul will have me back for some of the things that we touched on and some other things. I'd love to come back on the show.
Definitely. You definitely will. Thanks for being on and sharing your expertise with the audience. Because I'm one of those 60% when it comes to history, and I didn't pay very much attention in school, and I tell my wife all the time, I say, there's a lot of things I know, but when it comes to history and a lot of things that you learned in school, I can be rather stupid.
It's not being stupid, folks. Harry Truman, the famous president after Franklin Roosevelt, said there's nothing new in the world, just those things which have been kept secret from us. And that's what happens sometimes. We just remain ignorant of certain things. Ignorance is not being stupid. It means just being not aware. We ignored it. So don't beat yourself up. That's the training for people. Why do you read that book? Get on the football game.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah, well, football's fun too, but, whatever. But it's a whole other show. We're taking those sands of time away from your friends out there.
Yes, everybody, thanks for listening, and we will see you next time on The Spirit Side.
God bless.